"Emily, that man doesn't even have $1 to his name." My mother's voice echoed behind me while I stood at the front door holding Daniel's hand. I still remember how calm I sounded when I answered her. I trust him. Then I walked away from my family and chose the man I believed would love me even if he had nothing. At the time, I thought love was enough. I had no idea his family was about to turn my life into a nightmare. Fireworks exploded overhead while white paper confetti drifted through the air. Everyone around us was smiling and celebrating. But the happiest people there were probably the bride and groom. We were the center of attention, and that bride was me. I turned to look at Daniel standing beside me in his black suit, grinning like the luckiest man alive. In that moment, I honestly believed nobody in the world could have been happier than us. Daniel and I had been together since college. We first met during a student organization event on campus. Back then, I was one of the most popular girls in our department, while Daniel was quiet, ordinary, and easy to overlook. A lot of guys chased after me in those days, including him. Some came from wealthy families. Some were more attractive. Others had better futures waiting for them. But Daniel was the only one I noticed. Out of every man around me, he was the gentlest. He was patient, too. His family struggled financially, so he studied harder than anyone else. He spent most nights buried in textbooks while everyone else was out partying. People used to say he was smart enough to build a successful future for himself one day. After graduation, we both found stable jobs and started talking seriously about marriage. The first time Daniel brought me home to meet his parents, they welcomed me warmly. His mother kept smiling while saying he had finally found a good woman to settle down with. Things went very differently when I introduced him to my parents. They opposed the relationship almost immediately. The biggest issue was the difference between our families. Daniel grew up in a struggling working-class household. 4 people lived together inside an aging 2-story home in an old neighborhood outside Detroit. The place looked worn down from the outside, but at least there was enough room for everyone to breathe. My family lived in a completely different world. My parents owned several businesses and had been financially comfortable for years. I grew up with every advantage possible. My older brother Michael and I never had to worry about money, bills, or basic necessities. Compared to my life, Daniel looked completely out of his league. But I believed I had found the right man, and nobody could change my mind. I argued with my parents constantly, I cried. I begged Michael to help convince them. At one point, I even stopped eating because I was so desperate to marry Daniel. Eventually, my parents gave in. That wedding day happened exactly the way I wanted. Daniel looked thrilled. His parents looked even happier. The only people forcing smiles that entire day were probably my mother and father. Even though they still disliked the marriage, they tried to stay polite in front of the guests and Daniel's family because they were afraid I would suffer later if they caused problems. Before the ceremony, my parents gave me a large amount of cash along with expensive jewelry as a wedding gift. My mother also privately handed me the deed to a small commercial rental property near a highway outside the city. "Don't tell anyone about this place," she warned me quietly. "If anything ever goes wrong, you'll still have something that belongs to you." At the time, I thought she was worrying for no reason. I was too in love to imagine my marriage ever falling apart. Still, I listened to her. I locked the property documents inside my personal safety deposit box at the bank and never mentioned them again. After the wedding reception ended, Daniel and his family brought me back to their house. Our bedroom was upstairs. The moment Daniel stepped inside, he collapsed onto the bed with a long, exhausted sigh. "I'm dead tired," he muttered. He had spent the entire day greeting relatives, drinking with guests, and running around non-stop. I doubted he had eaten much at all. I told him to shower while I changed out of my dress. I planned to go downstairs afterward and make him something simple to eat. While I was changing inside the bathroom, someone knocked on the bedroom door. It was my mother-in-law. Apparently, she didn't see me, because I heard her ask Daniel where I was. "She's in the bathroom changing," he answered. A few seconds later, her voice lowered. The walls inside that old house were thin enough that I could still hear clearly. She told Daniel to come downstairs because she needed to talk to him privately. That immediately made me curious. I was already part of the family now. If there was something important to discuss, why hide it from me? After Daniel followed her downstairs, I quietly opened the bedroom door and stepped toward the staircase. My in-laws' bedroom sat directly beneath us. The house was old and the doors barely blocked sound at all. Even though they were speaking quietly, I could still make out most of the conversation if I focused hard enough. "So how much money did you two get from the wedding gifts?" my mother-in-law asked directly. "We haven't counted everything yet," Daniel answered carefully. "But probably several thousand. We'll count it later. Just give it to me first so I can hold on to it. We still owe money for the reception hall, catering, decorations, all of that." I froze. I knew Daniel's family didn't have much money, but this was still shocking. They were the groom's parents. Had they seriously prepared nothing for the wedding? And now she wanted to take all the cash gifts we had received from friends and relatives to pay off the ceremony expenses? Even if they were struggling financially, shouldn't they have talked to us beforehand instead of waiting until after the wedding ended? Mom, what are you talking about? Daniel sounded uncomfortable. Those gifts were for us. We still have to give money back whenever those people get married, too. We can pay them back slowly later, she snapped. But the vendors need payment now. If I don't pay them immediately, they'll come to the house demanding money. Daniel raised his voice slightly in frustration, which made everything upstairs even easier to hear. And Emily's parents already gave her money and jewelry anyway, she continued. That should be more than enough to help. That was from her family, Daniel argued weakly. We can't just use it like that. Listening upstairs, I felt anger building in my chest. I had not even been inside that house for a full day yet, and my mother-in-law was already calculating my money. The gift parents were meant to protect me and help us during difficult times later in life. Whether I chose to use them or not should have been my decision. I honestly thought people like this only existed in dramatic TV stories. That was when another voice suddenly entered the conversation. Apparently, my father-in-law had been sitting inside the room the entire time. What are you even saying? He asked his wife sharply. What kind of thinking is that? If we couldn't afford everything ourselves, we should have discussed it properly. You can't demand their wedding money and stare at her family's gifts like that. Aren't you embarrassed? Why should I be embarrassed? She shot back instantly. I'm taking money from my own son, not stealing from strangers. This wedding was for them, too. If they don't help pay for it, then who will? She kept arguing loudly while my father-in-law eventually gave up trying to reason with her. Standing upstairs listening to everything, I could barely believe what I had just heard. It felt like something from another century. Eventually, Daniel stopped trying to argue as well and headed back upstairs. Right before he left, I heard my mother-in-law yell after him. Don't forget to hand me all that wedding money. If people start asking for payment later, don't expect me to deal with it for you. I heard my in-law's bedroom door open downstairs, so I hurried back into mine before anyone noticed me standing near the staircase. Voices continued drifting up from below for another minute or two. Daniel finally came back upstairs looking strangely awkward. He walked inside, sat near the dresser, and glanced at me several times like he wanted to say something. I acted completely normal and kept fixing the blankets on the bed. You should go shower, I told him casually. He looked startled for half a second. It was obvious he still had no idea how to bring up the conversation with his mother. But he quietly grabbed his clothes and headed into the bathroom anyway. While he showered, I slipped downstairs to make him something quick to eat. The kitchen sat far from the bedroom area, and since I had just married into the family, I tried to stay as quiet as possible. I only planned to heat up a bowl of noodles and bring it upstairs before anyone noticed. Unfortunately, the flashlight from my phone barely lit the hallway. As I turned the corner, I accidentally slammed into an old metal serving tray hanging beside the wall. It crashed onto the floor with a deafening bang that echoed through the house like a gunshot. A second later, my in-laws rushed out of their room. What are you doing wandering around this late? My mother-in-law demanded immediately. I panicked. If I admitted I was making food, she might assume I had secretly come downstairs to eat alone in the middle of the night. After everything I overheard earlier, I already knew she was old-fashioned enough to judge me for something like that. I spotted the downstairs bathroom nearby and answered quickly. I needed the restroom. Daniel's taking a shower upstairs. Apparently the excuse sounded believable enough. Fine, she muttered. Next time turn on more lights before walking around. Then both of them went back inside their room. I finally exhaled in relief. After that, I didn't dare cook anything anymore. I was terrified of making another sound and embarrassing myself again. So I quietly headed back upstairs instead. By the time I returned, Daniel had already finished showering. He probably never heard the noise downstairs because he didn't ask about it. I climbed into bed first. The entire wedding day had exhausted me so badly that I barely even cared about romance anymore. Daniel seemed just as drained. He slid under the blanket beside me, kissed my cheek once, then wrapped an arm around me and fell asleep almost immediately. Our first night as husband and wife passed peacefully like that. Still, I kept thinking about the conversation downstairs earlier. Part of me wondered whether Daniel would actually follow his mother's demands. I had already made up my mind that if he asked, I would probably let him give her half the wedding money. We could keep the other half as savings for emergencies later. Before the wedding, Daniel once told me his parents still had money left from selling old family farmland years ago. According to him, it should have been enough to cover a wedding without any problems. That was why his mother's behavior felt so strange. The only explanation I could think of was that she simply wanted more money from us. Even so, I had just entered their family and didn't want unnecessary conflict. If I gave her part of the wedding cash, I could at least treat it as respect toward my husband's parents. Thinking that way helped calm me enough to finally fall asleep. The next morning, neither Daniel nor I had work, so technically we could rest longer. But because I was newly married into the household, I still woke up early. I cleaned around the house for a while before driving to a grocery store nearby to buy breakfast ingredients. When I got back, everyone was still asleep. I assumed the wedding had exhausted them too, so I quietly left the food in the kitchen and returned upstairs. Daniel was still snoring. I waited another hour before checking my phone again. It was already close to 8:30. My own parents had always woken up before 7, no matter how successful they became. Growing up in that environment, I wasn't used to seeing adults sleep half the morning away, especially older people. The silence downstairs started making me nervous. What if something had happened? But as the new daughter-in-law, I also felt awkward knocking on my in-laws' bedroom door by myself. Eventually, I shook Daniel awake. "Daniel, wake up, it's almost 8:30. Your parents still haven't come out yet." He barely opened his eyes. "It's only 8:30, he mumbled sleepily. "Exactly. They're still sleeping." "What if something's wrong?" Daniel rolled onto his side and scratched his messy hair. "My parents sleep late all the time, sometimes till 11, honestly. Leave them alone and come back to bed." Then he hugged his pillow and immediately drifted back to sleep. I just sat there staring at him in confusion. Honestly, this wasn't what I expected married life to look like. Most stories I heard about difficult mothers-in-law involved waking daughters-in-law before sunrise, forcing them to cook, clean, and handle chores nonstop while still working full-time jobs. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law demanded money one night and then slept until noon the next morning. I genuinely didn't know whether to feel relieved or worried. Maybe she was simply too tired from the wedding to start criticizing me yet. That explanation made the most sense, so I stopped overthinking and waited for everyone else to wake up naturally. More than an hour passed before I finally heard movement downstairs. When I checked the time again, it was already 11 in the morning. I went downstairs and started preparing lunch while my in-laws slowly got ready for the day. As I cooked, my mother-in-law occasionally wandered into the kitchen to watch what I was doing. I stayed extra careful with everything because Daniel once told me she criticized almost everyone. If she says it's nothing, he had joked before we got married, that usually means she approves. Back then, I thought that was funny. Now it just made me nervous. Luckily, she only watched silently before returning to the living room to watch television. My father-in-law disappeared somewhere outside as usual. Once lunch was ready, Daniel finally stumbled downstairs looking half asleep. We finished eating close to 1 in the afternoon. Daniel and I stood up first to clean the table. But right before I left the kitchen, my mother-in-law suddenly told me to sit back down. I exchanged a quick glance with Daniel. He looked just as confused as I was. Then I remembered the conversation from the previous night. My mother-in-law turned toward Daniel first. "Did you tell your wife what I said yesterday?" Daniel immediately looked uncomfortable. Of course he never brought it up. I already knew what she meant, but since I had overheard everything secretly, I pretended not to understand. Apparently she noticed Daniel's hesitation too, because she turned directly toward me instead. "Emily, how much money did you two receive from the wedding?" My father-in-law frowned right away. "Why are you asking that again?" "That's their business." She shot him an irritated glare, so he stopped talking, stood up angrily, and walked away without another word. Then she faced me again. "I'm asking you." "We got around $7,000, I answered carefully. "I need it," I blinked. "For what?" "To pay the remaining wedding expenses. Whether you like it or not, those bills still have to be paid." She stared straight into my eyes while speaking like it wasn't even a discussion. Even though I expected this already, hearing it directly still shocked me. I looked toward Daniel. He clearly disagreed with his mother but seemed too uncomfortable to openly fight her. At that point, I calmly answered myself. "If things are difficult financially, I'm willing to help. I can give you half. Daniel and I should keep the rest as savings in case something happens later." "No, half isn't enough." Her tone hardened immediately. "You still have all that money and jewelry from your parents. Use that too if you need to." I had already expected her to say that. "My parents gave those things to me personally," I replied evenly. "That isn't shared household money." Then I glanced toward Daniel, silently asking him to say something. He finally spoke up. "Mom, $3,500 should already help a lot." "What do you know?" she snapped. "You got married and immediately started taking your wife's side." I said I need all of it. That finally pushed me too far. "We respect you," I said firmly while standing up. "We're willing to help because this wedding was for us too. But if you keep pushing like this, eventually we won't even feel comfortable respecting you anymore." My mother-in-law stared at me silently for several long seconds. Then she stood up coldly. "Fine, but I expect the full amount later. Otherwise, don't bother talking to me." After she stormed away, Daniel and I looked at each other quietly. Even though I overheard everything the night before, I still felt disturbed seeing how drastically my mother-in-law changed after the wedding. For the first time since getting married, I honestly wondered if I had walked into the wrong family. Things only became worse after that. Not long later, my mother-in-law found out both our salaries through Daniel. I made around $7,000 a month while he earned closer to $9,000. The moment she heard those numbers, she announced that we needed to give her $10,000 every month for household expenses. I argued immediately. Daniel and I barely ate at home except dinner. There was no way we cost that much money, but she started crying and accusing us of being selfish. She complained that she couldn't even buy clothes or basic things for herself anymore. If she had been fair from the beginning, I honestly wouldn't have minded helping more. Instead, everything felt calculated. Still, Daniel eventually softened after hearing his mother cry. "Just think of it like savings," he told me quietly afterward. "She'll help us later when we have kids." I still thought the whole situation sounded ridiculous, but I stopped arguing because of him. Every month after that, we handed over $10,000. Daniel and I split the rest of our paychecks for personal spending, while secretly saving any overtime income we earned on the side. I also stopped keeping my jewelry and emergency money inside the house. With my mother-in-law behaving like this, I genuinely worried things might disappear one day. Once, while cooking dinner, I realized the groceries she bought were nowhere near enough for 4 adults. At my parents' house, one decent-sized fish could feed everyone comfortably. But my mother-in-law came home with something tiny and expected me to make an entire dinner from it. I quietly grabbed eggs from the refrigerator to cook extra food. Immediately, she stormed over. "There's already fish. Why are you making more? That isn't enough for 4 adults. Then learn how to cook properly," she snapped. "People with limited money can't afford to waste food." Then she literally snatched the eggs from my hands and shoved them back into the refrigerator before slamming the door shut. Afterward, she sat in front of the television but kept checking the kitchen every few minutes to make sure I didn't grab them again. So I cooked exactly the way she wanted. At dinner, the meal looked pitiful. Daniel stared at the table in confusion while I calmly filled my own plate and gave most of the fish to him on purpose. By the end of the meal, my mother-in-law barely had anything left except soup. Her expression looked furious. Funny enough, dinner portions became slightly larger after that. Still, she criticized everything I did. Too much cooking oil, too many seasonings, too much water, too much electricity. Even though the house had a washing machine, she complained our clothes weren't dirty enough to justify running it daily. She insisted I wash things by hand instead. Eventually, I started secretly doing laundry whenever she left for the convenience store. One afternoon after work, I stopped by a small produce shop to buy fruit because my mother-in-law almost never purchased any. The older woman working there recognized me immediately. "You dress nice," she said while weighing my fruit. "You probably make good money." I smiled politely, assuming she was just making conversation. Then she added casually, "If you earn that much, you should give your husband's mother more money." "She said you barely contribute anything." I stared at her. "What did she say?" "She told people you only give her around $2,000 every month, even though you live there full-time." Anger rushed through me instantly. Daniel and I were handing over $10,000 every month already. I grabbed my groceries and drove home immediately. When I walked inside, my mother-in-law was sitting in front of the television, laughing loudly. "I'm home," I said coldly. She glanced at the fruit bags in my hands. "Wow. Looks like somebody still has money left to buy luxury snacks." Then she leaned over trying to see what I bought. I ignored the comment. "Why are you telling people I only give you $2,000? Her expression changed immediately. "You just got home and you're already interrogating me?" The woman at the produce store repeated it directly to my face. "So what if I did?" She shot back. "If you actually understood family responsibility, you'd contribute more. I already give you $10,000 every month." She realized she was losing the argument and quickly tried changing the subject. "Go cook dinner. Daniel will be home soon." But this time I refused to stay quiet. I had seen too many stories where mothers-in-law spread lies until everyone blamed the daughter-in-law later. I was not going to let that happen to me. Right when the argument escalated again, Daniel walked through the door. He looked between both of us immediately. "What happened?" I told him everything. Meanwhile, his mother kept shouting over me. "Teach your wife some respect. She thinks she can question me now." For the first time, Daniel openly sided with me. "Mom, that's not okay," he said firmly. "We already give you plenty. If you tell people otherwise, everyone will think we're terrible children." My mother-in-law glared at him silently, turned off the television, then snapped bitterly, "You got married, and suddenly your wife matters more than your own mother." Then she stormed into her bedroom and slammed the door behind her. My in-laws owned a tiny corner convenience store a few blocks from the house. My mother-in-law usually opened late because she hated waking up early. But apparently both she and my father-in-law received retirement checks from factory jobs they worked years ago. The store existed more to keep them occupied than because they actually needed the income. My father-in-law barely stayed there anyway. Most of the time he either sat at home or wandered down to a small park nearby where older men gathered around outdoor chess tables every afternoon. Daniel once explained that his father wasn't a gambler or anything like that. He simply loved chess and spent hours either playing or watching other retirees pass the time. Both Daniel and I worked far from home, so we usually stayed near our offices during the day and only returned in the evening. One afternoon, right in the middle of work, my phone suddenly rang. It was Daniel. The moment I answered, I heard panic in his voice. "Emily, get to the hospital right now. Dad's not okay." Before I could ask another question, he hung up. I immediately asked my manager for emergency leave and rushed straight there. By the time I arrived, my father-in-law was already inside the emergency room. Family members weren't allowed through the doors yet. My mother-in-law sat outside crying while Daniel stayed beside her, trying to calm her down. The second he saw me, he stood up quickly. "They think it's a stroke," he said anxiously. "They said there might be a blockage in his brain. If they don't treat it fast enough, he could die." I stared at him in disbelief. That morning, his father had looked perfectly normal. Trying to stay calm, I asked the obvious question. "So when are they doing surgery?" Daniel hesitated before glancing toward his mother. "They said we need to pay first. Around $20,000 just for the operation." I immediately felt my stomach tighten. That amount alone was already terrifying, and hospital bills never stopped at surgery. There would still be medication, recovery care, room charges, food, and everything else afterward. $20,000 probably wouldn't even cover everything. I turned toward my mother-in-law. "How much do you already have? Maybe we can figure out the rest together." The moment I asked, she started crying even harder. "How would I have that kind of money?" she sobbed loudly. "We barely survive off retirement checks in that little store. We already spent everything on your wedding." I listened quietly, but honestly, I didn't fully believe her. This was the same woman who constantly squeezed money out of her son and daughter-in-law. I found it hard to believe she had saved absolutely nothing after all these years. Our wedding had not been some luxury celebrity event either. Meanwhile, she spoke as if she had sacrificed her entire life for us. I looked at Daniel and motioned for him to step away with me for a second. Once we reached a quieter corner of the hallway, I lowered my voice. "Do you really think your mom has no savings at all?" Daniel avoided my eyes. "We've been giving her money every month. They barely spend anything. Do you honestly believe she couldn't save a single dollar?" He stayed silent. I understood why. He had lived with his mother his entire life. Deep down, he probably knew some of her behavior made no sense, but he was still her son. Finally, he sighed heavily. "We can deal with that later. Right now, we have to save my dad first." I still thought the situation felt wrong. If his father's condition was truly life-threatening, why wasn't his mother contributing anything herself? But this wasn't the time to argue. I checked everything Daniel and I had managed to save over the past year, including leftover wedding money and emergency funds. Altogether, it still came up far short. We didn't even have half of what the hospital wanted. Daniel rubbed both hands through his hair in frustration before blurting out, "Maybe I should borrow from one of those fast cash places." "Absolutely not," I cut him off immediately. I had seen what predatory lenders did to people. Once interest started piling up, families drowned in debt so fast they never escaped it again. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Daniel snapped back, clearly overwhelmed. For several seconds, he just paced around the hallway looking completely lost. Then suddenly he looked at me. "What if you ask your parents?" I hesitated instantly. "My parents? They can afford it," he said quickly. "I'll pay them back with interest like a normal loan. You know those payday lenders would destroy us." Looking back now, that was where I made a mistake. Daniel should have been the one speaking to my parents himself. We were married already. If he wanted to borrow money for his family, he should have stood beside me and asked directly instead of sending me a loan. But at the time, I wasn't thinking clearly either. The second I explained the situation, my parents agreed to help immediately. They not only transferred the money, but also rushed to the hospital themselves to check on Daniel's father. I handed the money over to Daniel near the emergency room. My mother-in-law sat nearby the entire time. Right then, one of the doctors finally stepped outside. Daniel hurried forward to ask about his father's condition, but before the doctor could really answer, my mother-in-law interrupted quickly. Let the doctor rest first. You two should go see your father." For some reason, I didn't question anything. I assumed Daniel was too worried to wait, so I encouraged him to go inside immediately. Right before we entered the room, my mother-in-law suddenly grabbed Daniel's arm. "Give me the money first, so I can pay the hospital bills. Then you two can go see your dad." Daniel handed over the full amount without hesitation. A few moments later, we finally entered the room. My father-in-law lay in bed looking exhausted but fully awake, not unconscious, not dying. Not even close. Daniel looked at me. I looked right back at him. Neither of us understood what was happening yet. Still, we pushed the confusion aside for the moment and walked closer to the bed. The second my father-in-law saw us, relief crossed his face. "Oh, good," he said weakly. "You two made it." "We're here, Dad," Daniel answered while pulling a chair closer to the bed. "How are you feeling?" My father-in-law looked confused more than anything else. "I think I just got overheated outside," he said weakly. "Your mother suddenly dragged me here saying something was wrong with me. Where did she go anyway? Haven't seen her since this morning." As he spoke, he glanced toward the doorway expecting his wife to appear behind us. But after taking the money earlier, my mother-in-law still hadn't returned. A few minutes passed before I suddenly realized something else. "Did you eat anything today?" I asked carefully. He shook his head. "Your mother said she was stepping out to call you two, then disappeared. I've just been lying here hungry." Daniel and I exchanged a quick look. "I'll go grab food," I said immediately. I hurried downstairs and bought meals for everyone, including my mother-in-law. On my way back toward the room, I spotted her standing near the hospital entrance talking to someone. I called out once, but she either didn't hear me or ignored me completely, so I walked closer. At first, I only wanted to ask why paying the hospital bill was taking so long. But as I approached, the man beside her started looking strangely familiar. Then I recognized him. Victor, a local underground sports bookie who operated near our neighborhood. Why would my mother-in-law be talking to someone like him? Something instantly felt wrong. I slowed down and stayed behind a nearby pillar without them noticing. "Take this for now," my mother-in-law said quietly. "That's not enough," Victor replied coldly. "You know how interest works. I'll figure out the rest," she begged. "I still have retirement money coming in, and my son and daughter-in-law both work. They'll help me pay it." The moment I heard that, everything started clicking together. I stepped out immediately. "Mom, what are you doing?" Both of them turned toward me. "What debt are you talking about?" My mother-in-law looked startled for half a second while Victor stayed completely calm. Then she quickly recovered and snapped at me. "Were you spying on me? This doesn't concern you. Go back inside." She tried shoving me away, but I pulled my arm back. "If it doesn't concern me, why are you telling him your son and daughter-in-law will help repay it?" Her face hardened instantly. "You think you can interrogate me now?" Since she clearly wasn't going to answer honestly, I turned directly toward Victor instead. "You tell me, what does she owe you?" He narrowed his eyes at me. "If you keep pushing, your whole family's going to regret it." I didn't back down. "If you don't answer me, I'll report your betting operation." That finally irritated him enough to talk. "Your mother-in-law owes me almost $50,000, he said bluntly. "She just gave me 20 today. There's still 30 left. Better make sure she pays it unless you want problems." Then he spat near the ground, shot me one last warning look, and walked away. I slowly turned back toward my mother-in-law. Until that moment, I thought she was simply greedy and manipulative. I never imagined she had gambling debts that massive. The money we handed her earlier suddenly replayed in my head. "You gave him the hospital money, didn't you?" She lifted her chin stubbornly. "So what if I did?" "I owe money. Your family. That means you help." At that moment, I honestly wanted to slap her. She had used her own husband's health to trick us into handing over money, and somehow she still stood there acting proud of herself. For several seconds, I couldn't even speak. Eventually, I grabbed the food bags and walked back upstairs before I completely lost control. When I entered the hospital room again, my father-in-law had already fallen half asleep. Daniel looked up immediately. "Where's Mom?" "She's coming," I answered shortly. A minute later, my mother-in-law finally walked in behind me, acting perfectly normal. She grabbed food first and started eating immediately while casually saying, "Your father just fell asleep. Let him rest first." I looked at Daniel sitting there, completely unaware of what his own mother had done, and honestly felt bad for him. But no matter how uncomfortable it was, he still deserved the truth. I waited until he finished eating before speaking. "Daniel, Mom, come outside for a second. I need to talk to both of you." We stepped into the hallway. This time, my mother-in-law no longer looked arrogant, but she still didn't seem guilty either. I stared directly at her. "Is it true?" "Yes," she admitted flatly. "But I already owe the money now. As family, you should help me. I couldn't hold back anymore. You created this problem yourself. You're not some reckless teenager." Daniel and I emptied our savings trying to help today. We even borrowed money from my parents. "So," she shot back, "your parents are rich. That amount means nothing to them." I almost exploded. "My parents being wealthy has absolutely nothing to do with you. Did they steal from you? Scam you? Why should they clean up your mess?" She rolled her eyes bitterly. "Rich people always make money off somebody else anyway." I took a step toward her before Daniel quickly moved between us. "Please stop," he said desperately. "Mom, Emily, just stop for a second." Honestly, if he hadn't stepped in, I might really have hit her. I crossed my arms and forced myself to stay silent while Daniel turned toward his mother instead. Mom, I can't defend this. You lied to us. Then he asked the question both of us needed answered. Is Victor the only person you owe money to? My mother-in-law lowered her voice slightly. It's only him. And $20,000 already got paid today. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. You used Dad's hospital money to cover gambling debt. Your father only had heat exhaustion, she snapped defensively. The doctor already said he'd be fine after resting for a few hours. The second those words left her mouth, she realized she had exposed herself completely. Daniel went still. So you lied about everything. For the first time since I met him, he genuinely looked defeated by his own mother. Meanwhile, she finally seemed to realize she had gone too far. Fine, she muttered. I shouldn't have lied. But there's still $30,000 left, and Victor isn't someone we can ignore. If I don't pay him, he'll come after this family. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face silently. He looked completely overwhelmed. Finally, he said quietly, let us think about it. But tell me honestly right now, is Victor really the only person you owe? Yes, she answered immediately. Only him. The doctor later confirmed that my father-in-law had only suffered mild heat exhaustion. After resting a few hours, he was completely fine to return home. The entire thing made my mother-in-law look even more disgusting in my eyes. She had used her own husband as bait just to steal money for her gambling debt. I still couldn't understand how the amount had suddenly jumped so high. Later, she explained that at first, she thought she only owed a much smaller balance, but the interest kept growing month after month until it eventually reached almost $50,000. According to her, Victor finally stopped adding interest because he realized she would never be capable of paying it all anyway. I didn't believe that for a second. Men like Victor didn't become underground bookies by being generous. My father-in-law stayed home recovering for 2 more days before returning completely to normal. He still had no idea his wife had nearly destroyed the family over sports betting debt. If he ever found out, I honestly thought the shock might send him right back to the hospital. After that incident, Daniel made a decision. He said we would slowly repay the remaining debt, but he also refused to let his mother control money anymore. One evening, he sat her down and spoke firmly. Starting next month, Emily and I won't be giving you household money directly anymore. She'll handle the grocery budget and expenses from now on. You can keep running the store, but I'll manage the finances. My mother-in-law exploded instantly. What? So now you're trying to control me like I'm your child? She pointed furiously toward the convenience store outside. That store belongs to me. You think you can come into my house and take over everything? For years, she had controlled all the spending in the family. She bought whatever she wanted whenever she felt like it. Losing that authority clearly drove her crazy. But this time, Daniel refused to back down. You already lost $30,000 gambling, he said coldly. I'll help fix this because I'm your son. But I'm not spending the rest of my life chasing new debts every year. If we don't stop this now, who knows what happens later? Unable to argue against him directly, she suddenly turned toward me instead. This is your fault, isn't it? You've barely been in this family and already you're trying to act like the queen of the house. I chose not to respond. At that point, I understood something clearly. No matter what I said, she would always blame me anyway. Besides, Daniel finally saw the truth himself now. Arguing further would only create more chaos inside the family. So I quietly turned around and headed upstairs. Unfortunately, that only made her angrier. She suddenly rushed after me, grabbed my hair from behind, and yanked hard enough to send pain shooting through my scalp. Oh, so now you ignore me too, I screamed from the shock. Daniel had to physically pry her hands away from me while she continued shouting. I was furious, but fighting back would only make the situation worse. In the end, I locked myself upstairs until everyone calmed down. Honestly, I think losing financial control inside the house completely shattered her pride. Starting the following month, Daniel stopped giving her direct access to our income. I handled groceries, household supplies, and meal planning myself. Every morning, I bought whatever the house needed before work. Daniel warned me repeatedly not to hand his mother cash anymore, no matter what excuse she used. She still sat at the convenience store every day. But Daniel started checking the business himself regularly. He even installed a small camera near the register to monitor sales because he no longer trusted her around money at all. At first, she screamed about how we were abusing her. Daniel ignored it completely. Sometimes she tried asking me for money, claiming she needed it for random expenses. But after everything that happened, I stopped giving in. Whenever I refused, she cursed me behind my back and complained about me to neighbors. Honestly, I stopped caring. At least my husband finally understood what I had been dealing with. The only person still left completely outside the truth was my father-in-law. He simply assumed his wife disliked me personally, and occasionally told me not to argue with her because she was getting older. For his sake, I tried letting things go whenever possible. Daniel and I spent nearly a year working nonstop and saving every dollar we could. Eventually, we paid off over $20,000 of the remaining debt. The only money still owed after that was what we borrowed from my parents and the balance left with Victor. Looking back, I felt incredibly lucky that I never touched the emergency jewelry and property my parents gave me before the wedding. If I had used those things to clean up my mother-in-law's mess, I probably would have regretted it forever. As for the money borrowed from my family, I insisted Daniel personally return every dollar to them himself. For a while, life actually became peaceful again. I honestly believed that once the debts disappeared, everything between us would finally settle down. Daniel and I even started talking about having children someday. One night after work, Daniel casually mentioned that his company had recently hired a new department manager. "She's older," he said while changing clothes. "Divorced, I think. But she really likes me because I'm one of the top performers on the marketing team." At the time, I barely paid attention. A few days later, while sorting laundry, I noticed a lipstick stain on the collar of his dress shirt. Bright pink. Not the kind of shade younger women usually wore. Honestly, I still trusted my husband then. I figured maybe some coworker accidentally brushed against him or jokingly left a mark during a company gathering. Still, the color stuck in my mind. Then one evening, Daniel told me his office team was having a dinner event after work. "I'll probably be home late," he warned. "Don't wait up for me." I nodded and spent the evening alone before eventually falling asleep. Sometime during the middle of the night, I suddenly woke up and reached across the bed beside me. Empty. I checked the clock, almost 3 in the morning. Daniel still wasn't home. My stomach immediately tightened. I grabbed my phone and called him. The line rang endlessly before disconnecting. I tried again. This time someone answered. But it wasn't Daniel. A middle-aged woman's voice came through the speaker instead. "Daniel's too drunk to answer right now." Then the call ended. That single sentence sent my thoughts spiraling instantly. I remembered the lipstick mark. I remembered the older female manager he mentioned earlier. And suddenly I couldn't stop imagining my husband in another woman's house. I spent the rest of the night lying awake, staring into darkness, feeling sick to my stomach. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me asleep for a little while before the sound of keys opening the front door woke me again. Daniel walked into the bedroom looking exhausted and disheveled. I sat upright immediately. "Where were you? Why weren't you answering your phone?" The second he saw my face, he rushed over and wrapped his arms around me. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I drank too much and passed out at a coworker's place." I didn't hear my phone. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But while he held me, my eyes drifted toward his shirt collar again. Another bright pink lipstick mark, the exact same shade. My chest tightened. "Whose house were you at?" I asked quietly. Daniel froze for half a second before looking away. "My coworker Kevin's place," he answered. I said nothing after that. Instead, I waited until morning. The next day, I called Kevin myself, and Kevin unknowingly exposed the lie immediately. Daniel had never been there. By lunchtime, my anxiety had already turned into something much worse. Daniel finally woke up around noon looking hungover and tired. I waited until we were alone upstairs before confronting him directly. "We've been married over a year now," I said carefully. "Is there something you're hiding from me?" He forced out an uneasy smile. "What kind of question is that?" "Just answer me honestly." For several seconds, he stared at me before speaking quietly. "I love you. I've never wanted anybody else." "Then why did Kevin say you weren't with him last night?" His expression changed instantly. I continued before he could invent another excuse. "And a woman answered your phone." Silence. I could practically see panic building behind his eyes. "The lipstick stain on your shirt wasn't the first time either," I added softly. "I ignored it before, but I'm not stupid." Daniel lowered his head. Finally, he exhaled heavily. "I'm sorry for lying." My heart sank even before he finished the sentence. "I wasn't at Kevin's house. I felt my hands go cold." "Then where were you?" Daniel looked up slowly. "At my manager Patricia's place." I already suspected the answer before Daniel admitted it, but hearing the truth still hurt more than I expected. "I drank too much," he said quietly. "Patricia drove me back to her place because I could barely stand. I swear nothing happened between us." I stayed silent. "She said I passed out almost immediately," he continued. "Honestly, I don't even remember getting there." "You're sure nothing happened?" Daniel nodded quickly. "When I woke up this morning, my clothes were still on. Patricia was asleep beside me, but that was it." I studied his face carefully. Part of me still wanted to believe him. After everything we had survived together, I couldn't accept the idea that my husband would suddenly betray me like that. "I know I handled this badly," he admitted, "but I only love you. I promise I'll stay away from her unless work absolutely forces me to interact with her." The sincerity in his eyes slowly softened something inside me. Eventually, I chose to trust him. After that conversation, Daniel became even more careful than before. He went to work on time, came home directly afterward, and if anything unexpected happened, he always called me first. For a while, life finally felt stable again. At least that was what I believed. Then one afternoon, everything shattered again. I had just finished work and stepped outside my office building when a middle-aged woman wearing sunglasses and a face mask suddenly walked up to me. "Are you Emily?" she asked. "Yes." "Why?" The moment those words left my mouth, several women suddenly rushed toward me from different directions. One grabbed my hair. Another tried yanking at my jacket. Someone nearby started recording everything on a phone while they screamed over each other. "So, you like stealing other women's husbands? Teach this homewrecker a lesson. You think you can ruin families and get away with it?" I struggled violently, but there were too many of them. "Get off me," I shouted. "What are you talking about?" "I'm calling the police." That only made them more aggressive. Luckily, I was still wearing a thick coat, so they couldn't tear much off before the building security guard finally came running outside. "What the hell is going on here?" he yelled. "I'm calling the cops right now." Only then did the women finally back away from me. "She deserves it," one of them shouted while pointing at me. "She sleeps with married men." They kept cursing even as the security guard forced them farther from the entrance. That was when I suddenly noticed something. The middle-aged woman who approached me first was still standing several feet away from the chaos, watching everything quietly behind sunglasses and a face mask. Instantly, I understood. She was the one controlling all of this. Without even thinking, I shoved past the others and lunged toward her. I ripped the sunglasses and mask off before she could react. The face itself meant nothing to me, but the lipstick did. Bright pink, the exact same shade from Daniel's shirt collar. Her eyes widened in panic. She covered her face immediately and hurried toward a nearby SUV. The others quickly followed her inside. Before slamming the door, one of them pointed at me angrily. "This isn't over." Then the vehicle sped away. The security guard walked over, asking whether I needed medical help, but I barely heard him. All I could think about was that lipstick color. I left immediately and drove straight to Daniel's office, still looking disheveled from the attack. The second he saw me, he stood up in shock. "Emily? What happened to you?" I ignored the question completely. "Where's your manager?" Daniel frowned. "Why are you asking about Patricia?" Something nervous flashed across his expression. Right then, the woman herself appeared near the office entrance. Same sunglasses. Same bright pink lipstick. The moment she saw me standing there, her face changed instantly. She clearly never expected me to figure out who she was. Now everything finally made sense. Daniel looked between us in confusion. I didn't give either of them time to pretend anymore. "Your manager came to my workplace today and had a group of women attack me," I said loudly. "They accused me of stealing her husband." Daniel turned toward Patricia immediately. "You told me you weren't married." More employees slowly started gathering nearby after hearing the argument. Honestly, I didn't care anymore. If they wanted the truth, then this was the perfect place for it. Daniel stepped slightly in front of me and stared directly at Patricia. "Is this true?" Patricia still looked unbelievably arrogant. She crossed her arms and spoke like I was the one causing problems. "Daniel, this is your workplace. Are you really going to let your wife come in here making scenes?" Daniel's expression darkened immediately. "And you thought it was appropriate to show up at my wife's job with a group of women attacking her?" Patricia opened her mouth, but he cut her off before she could redirect the conversation. "They called her a homewrecker. They said she stole your husband." At that point, the entire office had gone nearly silent. People nearby kept whispering while pretending not to stare. For the first time since I arrived, Patricia finally looked uneasy. Daniel took a slow breath before speaking again. "I know you care about me," he said carefully, "but I only ever respected you as my manager and coworker. Nothing more." His voice became colder afterward. "But involving my family like this crossed every line." Then he turned around, grabbed my hand, and led me toward the exit. As we walked away, I glanced back once. Patricia stood frozen behind us with an ugly expression on her face. "Do you even want this job anymore?" she shouted after him angrily. Daniel never looked back. He kept walking beside me without hesitation. That moment made me trust him even more. If he truly wanted another woman, he never would have chosen me so openly in front of his entire office. A few days later, Daniel officially resigned from the company. When I asked whether he regretted it, he shook his head immediately. "I work to protect my family," he told me. "If a job starts destroying my marriage, then it's not worth keeping." Then he smiled faintly. "I'll find another position somewhere else. I know what I'm capable of." I looked at the man standing beside me and smiled for what felt like the first time in a long while. At that moment, I finally decided to tell Daniel the truth about the rental property my parents secretly gave me before the wedding. When he found out, he immediately started thinking about business ideas. The property sat near a busy highway outside the city and already had tenants renting part of it. Daniel believed we could eventually renovate the place and turn it into something bigger. After spending years helping manage his mother's convenience store, he joked that maybe he actually had talent for small business after all. Over the next year, we slowly paid off every remaining debt. Not long afterward, we welcomed our first child into the world too. Looking back now, I realize some families truly are unusual. Some mothers-in-law can be controlling, bitter, and impossible to please. But at the same time, I was lucky enough to have a husband worth trusting through all of it. And honestly, that made all the difference. Dear listeners, sooner or later most people become someone's in-laws. Some become mothers-in-law. Some become fathers-in-law. Some are lucky enough to experience both roles in life. That is why stories like this feel strangely familiar to so many people. Maybe we disagree with certain characters. Maybe we sympathize with others. But somewhere out there, families just like this probably exist behind ordinary front doors in quiet neighborhoods all across the country. And perhaps the greatest blessing any household can have is not perfection, but someone willing to protect that family even during the hardest years. Because with the right people beside each other, even unstable homes can eventually become peaceful again.